Whew, the more I look at that model of the original USS Enterprise, Constitution class, NCC 1701, they used to impress people when you know that kind of shit, right? Now everybody knows it. The more I look at it, the one from Discovery, the model of it, the more I like it. I mean, I didn't mind it when I saw it at the end of season 1 of Discovery anyway. But, boy, I mean, it's got a real... I don't know, it feels a little more Star Trek, as in the established Star Trek, that we've come to know and love over the past, at least 30 years. I say more established, since the Next Generation and so on and all the way into Enterprise. But I don't know if John Eves designed that, because John Eves has been fucking designing everything in Star Trek forever. That guy's so goddamn brilliant. But, wow, what a beauty. But I should save that kind of conversation for the Star Trek update. But because... there's going to be so much Discovery throughout, as in Star Trek Discovery, throughout January. I won't be doing the Star Trek update till much later in the month. That way I can review all of the episodes that are going to be starting on the 17th, even though there'll only be a couple. We do have the short track, which is going to come out the day after this. Of course, welcome to your Sovereign Tech Patreon, only Wednesday Q&A. The day after that comes out should be Thursday the 3rd, I believe. In fact, the short track coming out is going to be another one with Harry Mudd, which I can't wait. What a group. They turned him, I mean, what's his name? Ryan Wilson or whatever. I mean, just turned it into a tremendous character. It's so memorable from season 1 of Discovery. And since this will be the end of the short tracks planned so far, I'm probably going to turn this into my own little custom Blu-ray. I'll just take, 1080p copies of all 4 of them and put it together. But anyway, like I said, that's all for the Star Trek update, which is going to come out later in the month. Usually I have it come out earlier in the month. Now it's just going to be later in the month, and you're going to get all other kinds of hotness, obviously, throughout this month on Patreon, as you do. Of course, I had a couple people actually. Now, there's been a lot of people leaving Patreon. Well, look, we have a lot to talk about. I'll get into it. In fact, there's something else I want to discuss quick first. But there's been a lot of people leaving Patreon, obviously due to more of Patreon's banning, and people are, wanting to... I don't know. I'm not sure if they bothered, shall we say, well, here, look. I mean, when Patreon was banning all those adult accounts, the fact that I didn't see a mass exodus at that point kind of troubles me, that now it's only a mass exodus because of a certain, perhaps a certain person. Whatever, I mean, people do what they do. But anyway, a couple people left because they felt like that there was less Patreon content coming out. And they were people in the dollar level. And hey, I mean, because there is, when you leave Patreon, there's like an exit a survey where you can say why you're leaving. I've had people leave because honestly they said they became Eastern Orthodox, as in Christian Eastern Orthodox, and they said you could see where I wouldn't be able to follow your work anymore. Obviously I speak pretty harshly against a lot of organized religion, but anyway, whatever. But a couple people claimed to leave because they said that there was like a lack of content. Now they're in the dollar level. Look, there's tons of content coming out. Some of it though is coming out in the $5 level. Okay. Now the irony there is that, like, I actually, I emailed one of these people about that, and they more or less got back with me, and I know for a fact actually that this specific person, the one, is libertarian. But got back with me saying, well, that's not, when you started Patreon, all content was for the dollar level, feels like the game changed or something like that. I mean, for a libertarian to complain to me about me wanting to make more money, okay, off of content that I make, for me wanting to turn a profit. Wow, guys. Wow. Libertarians sometimes. How about a little consistency? I mean, I thought you cats were all about profit. What the fuck? I mean, believe me, I'm the first one to say, I know the old adage from Ayn Rand, right? Profit's not a dirty word. And of course, Brian Sovereign, myself, I have a saying, value's not a dirty word either. Okay. But I like to think I provide a shit ton of fucking value. All right. And just because I'm putting stuff in upper tiers, hey, okay. You don't think you're getting enough for a month for $1 a month? Who am I to argue with you? I don't know. I'm not sure what you expect in libertarian paradise, what you're going to get for $1 a month out of anybody in that, but hey, all right, man. So anyway, the other thing I wanted to talk about quick, and I really want to get to like 3 questions in this episode, all of which I think are great. I want to get to them. A couple like tech, then kind of tech and philosophy, and then just raw dog philosophy. And we'll get our album of the week in as well. So I have been rewatching recently, just for the giggles. And just to see what the presentation kind of looks like. First off, actually what I was really doing is I was testing out a new laptop, which is from a company out of China called Chewy, that has been very successful with various Kickstarters, various crowdfunding campaigns to make these ridiculously inexpensive computers. And I mean ridiculously inexpensive. Sub $300, they have like backlit keyboards and 1080p screens and all this other stuff that you just don't get anywhere else. And ironically, I mean, like they really do innovate. It's pretty amazing what they're putting out there. I'll do a review after I do a few more things with this very specific laptop. In fact, it's the Chewy Lapbook, Chewy CHUWI, the Chewy Lapbook 12.3, which has a 2K screen on it. I mean, but it's well under $400. Like, I mean, it's this really, really inexpensive computer. It's crazy. But anyway, I was testing out the A, 2K screen, and B, can the, very basic Celeron, I think it's the N3450 or whatever, quad-core processor, can that handle actually playing Blu-rays on it when I slap connect a Blu-ray drive to it? And to test out the Blu-rays, I popped in my very rare collection of Buck Rogers in the 25th Century, the show from 1979, 1980, Buck Rogers in the 25th Century Blu-ray collection. And I popped that in and was, testing out the menu system and everything. Of course, I use Power DVD. I actually use Power DVD 18 now. It got to, well, anyway, that's a whole other story because I did a big rant about Blu-rays a little while back. I think you can find it on my YouTube channel. Regardless of that, I was testing out the features and everything because I was kind of testing out Power DVD 18 as much as anything else as well on this, how well did it run on the lower end hardware and whatever, which, by the way, it played beautifully. Everything worked beautifully. But I was watching this and I put on some of the, like some of the special features as well as some of the commentary during episodes and everything. And Buck Rogers in the 25th Century, I reviewed that years ago on Sovereign Tech. It is one of my favorite shows of all time. And in fact, back when I used to really post on Instagram, you can find where I know I've shared a lot of Buck Rogers photos, and, pretty much on every one, I just say, this is everything I've ever wanted to be in life. This is Buck Rogers. In fact, in the military, when I was in the military, I even tried to get people to call me Buck instead of Brian. It didn't really take off, but whatever, I tried. But this is a show where it really, they did like kind of a theatrical release in 79 of the first couple episodes, which, was, in my opinion, phenomenal. Like the first 4 episodes of the show are just amazing. There's the kind of the movie, Buck, which you could effectively call Buck Rogers, the movie, which ended up being a 2-parter on TV. Then there's the 2-parter after that, which has Jack Palance in it, a whole bunch of big actors and everything. In fact, I think Jamie Lee Curtis was in it as well, which is Planet of the Slave Girls. And both just a couple of brilliant fucking pieces of science fiction. I mean, there's other great episodes within that. In fact, I'll mention that in a second, or I'll talk about that in a second. But I was listening to some of the commentary, and I was learning shit I never, ever knew. Now, I mean, you gotta understand, this came out before I was even born. Like... so I can't, a lot of what attracts people to Sovereign Tech is that I had the fortuitousness of growing up when a lot of these technologies that we're dealing with today or its precursors were nascent. Okay. Or were just in their early stages. So I can tell you kind of, at least in, the part of the world that I was living, I can tell you how people felt about these things. I can give you history. I can tell you about what they were saying in the news and all this stuff. I have a very, fortunately, A, I have a very good memory. B, I have a, good sense of history and even, more recent history. And so I can cover a lot of this. And I think a lot of people, whether they consciously or unconsciously realize it, that's a lot of what I think is my draw, is that, I can tell you about that time when maybe other people weren't paying so much attention because the internet was very new or whatever else. But when Buck Rogers originally came out, back in 79, 1980, I wasn't there. I didn't know. And my gauge on how people felt about Buck Rogers was largely based around back when you used to be able to hang out with people that also had a sense of history, or like nerds and sci-fi fans who, maybe grew up when Star Wars, New Hope first came out, when Battlestar Galactica was originally, the real Battlestar Galactica from 78, not the new horse shit, or, or when Buck Rogers was running, and, who were around when that happened. And most of those people who I respect, because unlike today, I mean, like they were into science fiction, honestly, in the face of persecution, which was absolutely the case for pretty much up until the mid-aughts. You were effectively insulted for being into science fiction. That's a fact. I mean, it's just that I can certainly tell you. And there's plenty to bolster that, going back decades, even to the 1940s and 50s or even 1930s and so on, when science fiction was talk about nascent. So the opinions that I would get at, like Dragon Con and a lot of these other conventions in the late 90s, early aughts and so on, was that people thought the show was ridiculous. They couldn't stand it, And in comparison to the likes of Babylon 5 and SG-1 and, Star Trek being at an all-time hotness, at that time, I can kind of see where maybe they were just so blown away by what was coming out then, because it was very much a golden age of science fiction on television. Now we're just, it's a deluge, and I don't want to say it's too much. There's no such thing as too much. That's like saying there's too many science fiction books out there. That's a ridiculous statement to make. But now, like, science fiction, in my opinion, feels very much, there's a real sameness that's kind of going out there, as to where in the 90s you had a lot of creativity going on with science fiction. Shows would get greenlit. I mean, like Star Hunter, a bunch of like shows that you'd never imagine, or that most people don't even know ever fucking existed, because they have no desire to look into history, which is, that's effectively how civilizations and species die off, when they pay no attention to history, even within their own art and fiction. I can see where maybe what they were doing is, and I'm trying to be kind about it, okay, because, recently I've been trying to think a little bit better of the species, I've been influenced by someone, into thinking that way. But regardless, I'm going to try and assume that maybe that's what was going on for them, because when I listened to watching Buck Rogers, trust me, we're going to get into great questions here. When I listened to, these like, the commentaries for the episodes that are only available on Blu-rays. Again, the major failing of these streaming services is you never get this kind of great content where there's like the extra content and so on. When I'm listening to these commentaries and some of the documentaries and everything, come to find out, and I never really knew this. I just never knew, and no one ever really talked about it because everybody was too busy, dealing with the newer stuff, which, look, I love SG-1. Obviously, I love Babylon 5. I love, and obviously all those Star Treks. I love it all, so I'm not making fun of those. I don't make fun of science fiction really up until, like, when, Doctor Who becomes a thing again. That's where I start to insult science fiction and science fiction fans, because I don't know what the fuck they're doing. But anyway, I'm baffled. But regardless of that, so, but anyway, come to find out, the first season of Buck Rogers, which ended up having 2 seasons, the first season was wildly popular. I had no idea. Like, it was crazy popular. And people loved it. Like, they really loved it. Like they were into this show, and the show had a winning formula. And look, it's a formula that I've emulated in most of my creative pursuits my whole life, and certainly with Sovereign Tech, where it's kind of this like ridiculous, cheeky, kind of over the top, campy stuff. Okay, and I've certainly done that, but sexy at the same time, right? And I've certainly, gone for that with that attitude. I mean, Buck Rogers was effectively, in a very real way, James Bond in space, right? With a little less ridiculousness than what early James Bond would have. And, it was just so much fun. And to find out now, that actually, no, the show was very popular in its day. I mean, it blew my mind. I was like, well, fuck, okay. And pretty much what happened is that Glenn Larson got kicked out or left, more or less, at the end of season 1. And the guy they brought in to continue the show with season 2, pretty much when they did the whole searcher thing and everything, killed the show. Like he fucked it up. He fucked up the, everything that was great about season 1. And not to say that season 2 was bad. I actually, in some ways, I like season 2. There's problems with it. I'm not going to deny that. But that he got rid of the formula from season 1. Now, I was more or less informed that is because the network at the time that was airing, was ABC, that was airing Buck Rogers, wanted to shift things a bit. But it turns out, no, that it was just a showrunner that came in. He shifted things and went away from the winning formula of season 1. And wow, what a shame, of course. But at the same time, my mind was blown to find out, no, actually, people really love this show. I don't know what's wrong with people today, why they still don't love it, but fuck them. Because I really don't find a whole lot of people that are, come up to me and want to talk about Buck Rogers when they certainly know that they could. My heart's on my sleeve. I look up, I have mini mate figures of Buck Rogers. I actually have a patch for the United Earth Directorate. There's no way you don't know I'm a Buck Rogers fan, and no one ever wants to talk to me about it, which is, whatever, that's my life. But that is the depression that those of us that have a sense of history and a fair memory, have to deal with. The best thing we can hope for is that some lovely person comes into our lives and wants to enjoy it with us, which, hey, I can certainly say that those amazing, lovely, wonderful people, best people on the planet, do exist. But I found out all kinds of wild shit just from listening to these commentaries, again, which you're never going to get on Netflix or whatever fucking streaming service out there. You got to have the hard copy where that stuff can be stored and viable to be a thing. Because to do it on a streaming service, there's ways, to add in, different audio tracks and all that stuff. But, streaming services are already running at are running a fine line as far as, quality of the stream, bandwidth, and all of that, adding in things like that is probably a very risky and likely not cost-effective proposition as far as the technology itself of streaming goes, so they don't do it. And what a shame, like I said, because, this is priceless info. But regardless of that, I found out that Gil Gerard, who played Buck Rogers, for season 2, they were going to fire Aaron Gray, which Aaron Gray and Gil Gerard are the whole reason to watch the damn show. But Aaron Gray, she was going to get fired in season 2, and pretty much, Gil Gerard said, look, I'll walk if you get rid of Aaron Gray. That he had to do that to keep her, to more or less let her keep her job. And you can see in season 2 where, unfortunately, Aaron Gray's character of Colonel Wilma Deering, who is really a very powerful, in my opinion, feminist icon in the first season, such a powerful female character in every sense of the word, brilliance, genuine strength, loving, and all everything that you want a human, not just a woman, but a human to be, that I want a human to be. She really got downgraded in season 2, and I guess it's because, she barely kept her job, among other reasons. So, anyway, not that I'm complaining about seeing Aaron Gray in a miniskirt, in season 2, by no means. Regardless, the stories I could tell. But there was that. In fact, Aaron Gray, there's a point where she's talking about her favorite episode of Buck Rogers ever was Space Vampire, which is my favorite episode. I never knew Aaron Gray loved that episode. I had no idea. And, I thought it was I was worried that, in liking that episode, shit, we've been going 20 minutes talking about all this stuff. Okay, well, look, we'll get to the questions. I thought maybe that, Aaron Gray didn't really like the episode Space Vampire because they really play up her sexuality in that. It's a very sexy episode in certain ways. And if you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. But no, she said she loved it and it allowed her to get in some real acting and everything. And I think that's great. When an actress, kind of like an Anne Hathaway and some others, where they genuinely appreciate, enjoy, and love, being sexy and being over the top sexy and so on and all that. Like, I have so much respect for that. People that are, really open with their sexuality and everything, just dynamite. And when they look like Aaron Gray, I'm not complaining either, but that was, when there's a confidence that comes with that, right? And it can show off in either men or women, and it certainly showed off with her. And I think that's just so cool that was her favorite episode as well. So anyway, just an enlightening thing that I've been complaining for years. What the fuck? Why wasn't Buck Rogers a big deal? The show was brilliant. Come to find out, it actually was a big deal. It's just they did such a dramatic shift when they brought in a new showrunner that he fucked things up, and so they ended up canceling the show because the ratings dived because the show lost its sexy, it lost its fun. I mean, it still kind of had its sexy, but it lost a lot of the elements that made it great. So enlightening for me to learn about, and these are the things you can only learn about. You're never going to learn about it on Netflix, right? You're not. Fuck Netflix. But anyway, okay, we have questions to get into. I want to get into these questions. Thank you for indulging me in talking about what I was up to. Again, I'll do that review of the Chewy Lapbook 12.3 in the coming days. So, okay, let's open it up with a little tech question here from a great patron, someone that I just love. Here we go. I am a big fan of open source and have been using Keepass XC for the past few years because I was uncertain about the Keepass HTTP connector for Keepass 2 and audit findings of plain text transfer. So, Stanley, breaking in for a second. Okay, to explain what the hell we're talking about here. Keepass XC is a fork, a hobbyist fork that's important to bring up, okay, of Keepass X, which itself is a fork of Keepass, which Keepass is up to version Keepass 2, or is up to version 2 of Keepass, so that, it kind of gets shortcutted to being called Keepass. These are password managers, and in fact, I have recommended Keepass more specifically for years, okay, because it doesn't really run off of the cloud model. However, for it to be able to interact with your web browser and so on, there is an extension for Firefox and Chrome, I believe for Chrome, that's called Keepass HTTP connector, effectively, and that makes it work where it works kind of like LastPass. Okay. Just so you know what we're talking about there, and I'll expound upon this. And like I said, we have some philosophical stuff to get in after this. All right. So anyway, obviously reading the question more, obviously not using a connector would be safer, but ease of teaching unskilled family, I've always pushed XC for the ease of maintenance. What are your thoughts on the security between the two and the introduction of mono/wine native cross-platform support outside of the obvious malware vulnerabilities that should be safeguarded anyway? Okay, so as far as introduction of mono/wine native cross-platform support, Keepass itself, or Keepass 2, has recently become fully compatible with either using Mono, which Mono is pretty much a .NET framework, okay, a Microsoft .NET framework emulator for Linux and BSD and so on. Wine, of course, is very popular, which Wine, what does it stand for? Wine is not an emulator or something like that, which is been around for decades, effectively an emulator for Windows software, right? Even though they say it's not an emulator, it's effectively, for lack of a better way of saying it, it's an emulator for running, Windows software, some Windows software on various Linux platforms. Okay, so Keepass, original Keepass, now can work on Linux if you're running it through Wine and Mono. Now, there are people who have concerns around it, and we'll talk about this a bit, okay? Because one major difference here, okay, with Keepass X or Keepass XC specifically. Now, the reason Keepass XC started getting developed was, and it hasn't been around that long, it started getting developed because Keepass X wasn't getting a fast enough development cycle. There weren't new features getting added in and a bunch of other stuff. Pretty much anything, though, that has been developed for like Keepass X, like isn't there like Keepass X for Android or something like that, can integrate, or Keepass XC is sort of backwards compatible with that. I mean, in fact, actually, I think Keepass XC can work with can also work with the Keepass connector, or the Keepass HTTP connector. Anyway, regardless of all of that, to really get to the point around the security, and how to run with all this. First off, I think a lot of people would probably ask the question, why not just use LastPass? Well, I mean, there's the real issue of LastPass being involved with, that it's cloud storage, right? Like it's on everything you've got is on some server somewhere. And the concern would be if there were an exploit or vulnerability or something that could get somebody access to that, they do it. It's where with Keepass, if you're really keeping it on your computer, on your desktop or whatever, it's what they would call client side, right? Where all the data, someone would have to get access to your computer to get access to your passwords in your Keepass password manager or Keepass XC password manager. Now, Keepass XC itself really only works on desktops. Okay. It does not, technically, they don't develop anything for mobile platforms. For some people, that's a no-go. That's a hard stop. Sorry, if I can't run my password manager on my smartphone, I'm fucked. I would argue against that. Okay. I would say do as little as possible as far as like using passwords and all these other things on your smartphone as possible. Really, don't, unless it's through some kind of like YubiKey system or something along those lines. I would not be storing like passwords. I wouldn't be storing anything, on my smartphone as much as I could help it. Because with a desktop platform, you have a lot more control. So, yeah, I mean, he brings up the point that, the question asker brings up the point that, how do you feel about the introduction of mono/wine support and all that? Aside from malware and exploits and the vulnerabilities of those platforms itself and of C, as to where, Keepass XC is written in C++, which is a little better, the native, you generally, as much as possible, you don't want to run shit in Wine or Mono. You want to run things, in native code, which Keepass XC, say if you want to run it on Linux or Mac or wherever, they make it available, and they make it available on most. I mean, they have packages for OpenSUSE, so on. Like you can install it on just about anything. It's all native libraries, and that's really the way you want to go. Running something on Wine, especially with a modern computer, and something as basically set up as Keepass is, it's not going to hurt you. You're not going to see a speed difference necessarily, in my opinion. It really is just a matter of security as far as that goes. As far as using the Keepass HTTP connector, yeah, there have been a lot of bugs found with that. I mean, basically, if you're running Keepass, if you're wanting to keep your passwords that locked down to where you're concerned that it could get accessed by a bad actor, a malicious actor on LastPass servers, then fuck yeah, you should not use the Keepass HTTP connector, because there have already been found, and they've been talked about on GitHub and everything. There have already been exploits discovered in really in how that works. Now, the flip side to this, okay, if the question is really about, do I use Keepass, say Mono and Wine, or do I use Keepass XC? I mentioned earlier that Keepass XC is really, it's an open source project, so is Keepass, but it is, a hobbyist fork, okay? Meaning that this is being developed, even though it's being developed faster than what it's being forked off of, which is Keepass X, which again is a fork as well off of the original Keepass, or Keepass 2 now. Keepass XC is being done by hobbyists. It's not something where they make money. It's totally free. They make no money whatsoever. As to where Keepass is somewhat of a business, somewhat of a company. There have been, in fact, very early on in Keepass XC's history, there have been where there were bugs and exploits that were found that were pretty dramatic. Like they were not good. I mean, it could really lead to some very real problems or potentials for your passwords not being secure by the password manager itself. Now, a couple of the major ones I know were, plugged in a day. Okay. But here's the thing, is that because it is by hobbyists, they might miss shit, and it's not like a lot of people, open source is important. Open source is the thing. I mean, the open source movement, fully supportive of that on Sovereign Tech. And, it's already won and it continues to win going forward. Okay. But most people, even myself, aren't going to sit down, look at all those lines of code with a cup of coffee, and everything at a Starbucks or something and kind of kick back and do that. Most people just aren't going to, that's just not going to happen. So when, someone who's maintaining, say, Keepass XC or something and says, well, look, if you don't trust us, just, you can take a look at the code yourself. I mean, the average person's really not going to do that, especially when we're talking about ease of, for family and so on, like the original question asker put down. Point being is that there is, I think, the potential concerns around not running a password manager natively, say on a Linux desktop, like you could with Keepass XC, and instead running Keepass 2 on mono/wine, okay, on a Linux desktop or whatever. Like it's. I think the arguments could be made both ways to where it's almost a stalemate, because you have Keepass, which has a very fast and well done and professional development cycle. Keepass 2, that is, okay. And then you have, but it's also like a business and it is running on mono or wine in Linux. But then you have Keepass XC, which has a pretty good development cycle, okay. But because it's a hobbyist thing and, there's less people looking at it and effectively they can't make it their job like the people at Keepass do, there's the chance that they could miss more things because of the hobbyist nature of it. So it's really like my thoughts is that it's kind of a stalemate. Arguments can go both ways, and in many ways it comes down to your own tolerance and your own comfort around it. I guess since Keepass XC offers a Snap package, which Snap is this really great new repository system effectively for Linux that keeps things updated very well. I mean, it's really great. I would probably want to use Keepass XC on a Linux machine just because of that. If I were using a Windows machine, though, I'd use Keepass 2 instantly. It really depends upon what you're doing as far as platform goes. So that's kind of my answer. And like you said, you kind of wanted anything beyond the malware side of things. Well, I'm going to go with more like the developer take and the concerns around that. And you don't have to use, the HTTP connector. You don't have to use that with any of them. Okay, it's not a requirement. You can turn that off. And I would argue that if you're using Keepass, don't even use that anyway. Okay, and just get people used to opening up their password manager independently. And you could say, well, especially in Windows, like, how do you trust what is what the clipboard is copying and pasting? Is that creating some kind of concern? Blah, blah, blah. Is Windows, key logging everything, which, Microsoft has done in the past and probably still is to some degree. Granted, it's no better on mobile platforms. Okay. So, I would not use the connector. I have very real concerns around that. And like I said, it kind of defeats the purpose because I don't necessarily trust what's happening, storage of client-side materials by extensions, by extension platforms, even on Firefox and so on. You want to keep things away from the browser as much as possible anyway, because the browser is just too hot of an attack vector. Okay, and extensions and add-ons are too hot of an attack vector. So I wouldn't use the connector, but depending upon what platform you're using, if you're using Windows, just go ahead and use Keepass 2. If you're using any other platform beyond that, absolutely use Keepass XC, I think. I don't think you're going to notice the speed difference, but just the fact that it's available as a Snap package, I think is very advantageous as far as Linux goes. But do keep in mind, I don't know other than that if there's a real advantage, because you have two different development philosophies, and I'm not knocking the hobbyist development philosophy, right? Like, I think that's why we have Audacity that I'm recording this on. That's why we have a bunch of different things that we do. The thing is that the hobbyist, development philosophy becomes a little bit more of a concern once you realize, or once it becomes something that could be, what you could call a life or death situation, or something as serious as your passwords, that's where it becomes an issue. Like for me, so actually, I'll tell you, I joked about this on social media years ago, but I actually was taking it very seriously at one point that I was going to do a fork of Keepass, very much for the same reasons that Keepass XC became a fork, because, the development cycle wasn't enough and everything. And I was going to work on my own. In fact, I even had a name for it. And yes, it's a funny name, but that was on purpose because I figured it'd be great marketing. I was going to call it Kenny Loggins, as in the singer Kenny Loggins, who I love. But instead it's like login. It'd be only one G instead of two, like there is in Kenny Loggins' name. I was going to call it Kenny Loggins. But I realized that I could not possibly, for something that should be taken as seriously as it is with a password manager, I could not give the attention. And even if I hired employees at the time, I could not have given it the attention that it needed. And so I stepped away from that. So that's why I say, when something as serious as passwords, or if it's like some kind of encryption, anything like that, like with Audacity being a hobbyist thing, well, sure, it's just, all code needs to be audited and verified at any point. And you want to get, every piece of software, there are security concerns around, right? Okay. But, when it's just something like that, where it's sound editing software, okay, your life's probably not on the line as far as software, as far as that goes. But security is the name of the game with, something like your password manager. So having hobbyists be in charge of it, might not be the best thing on planet Earth. You know what I mean? Can raise concerns. I'm not saying that it's inherently bad. In fact, I dare say it's inherently good, but there can be greater concerns. So it really, my answer comes down to what platform are you using it on? If it's Windows, go with Keepass 2. Again, if it's anything else, yeah, fine, use Keepass XC. So that's what I have. I'm not like knee deep, and I love the fact that like Keepass XC uses IRC. I've been on their, in their channel and Freenode and so on, and seen what's going on there. There's a great community around it, so I feel a little more confident about it. That's why I'm happy to recommend it. But yeah, anyway, that's what I got. I don't have like a ton of like really, really in-depth info. I know there's been exploits. There's been exploits and vulnerabilities found, or bugs, I guess maybe more accurately say, in Keepass XC, Keepass X, and Keepass 2, across the board. But in that sense, I don't see where one has any advantage necessarily over the other. But in what I described, well, that's for you to choose what you want to do with. Family being able to use it, that's a very real concern. That's why easy use becomes a thing. And, you always got to ask yourself, I'm spending a lot longer on this than I anticipated, but you always have to ask yourself, like, who are you trying to protect your passwords from? If you're trying to protect your passwords from like high-level hackers, or maybe even nation states, maybe, and those are two separate things. High-level hackers, independent hackers, or crackers, I should call them, because I think hackers are heroes. Or, nation states, those are two different things. If you're trying to do that, you have a very different thought process that you go through. If you're just trying to have your passwords more readily available, but you want it locked away from the average person, or maybe someone, I don't know, in your apartment complex or some bullshit like that, maybe LastPass is a totally viable thing for you to rock with. Okay. But the cloud storage issue is a very real issue, and getting away from cloud storage in general, or, more public cloud storage, even though these are private companies like Google and Dropbox, getting away from that, from more quasi-public cloud storage, I think is a very good thing at all times. So, okay, let's move on to another question here. And this is one that actually links to an article. I'm not going to read the entire article, but I want to read this person's question. And then we'll get into, and this is kind of a tech and philosophy thing, but then we'll get into a philosophical question. Hi, Brian. I just read this article about why it's important to be more inclusive towards women in the blockchain space. And I wanted to share it with you because I really like this paragraph. By the way, this will be linked to in the show notes if you want to read it as well. The article comes from dashnews.org, and it's in response to something that was talked about or said on a Dash podcast, which, okay, I guess Dash is that kind of a fucking thing. I've never been like too enthused by Dash, but I get that there are people that are. Anyway, reading on. So here we go. Here's the quote from the article. In particular, decentralized and permissionless tech has often been masterminded as a tool to help those traditionally underserved by current institutions. And in many countries, women disproportionately make up this key target group. If anything, the female demographic should be the first one targeted, end quote. What do you think about the idea that women should be seen as a key demographic for cryptocurrency-related outreach? Or do you think it is too patronizing talking about it in that way? Best regards, from a great patron there. Thank you. Yeah, great question to bring up. This is a conversation I've had a few times. I mean, I'll tell you this, and there are older episodes of Sovereign Tech from a few years ago, back when the kind of blockchain convention scene was a little bit hotter than it is now. I mean, it's still a thing, but it's a little bit hotter than it is now. In fact, actually, and I know for a fact that it's still true to this day. There have been situations in, shall we say, Miami and other events where this has been so. Look, like, it's not... I mean, I want to respond to the direct question, but I want to bring this point up very quickly. The blockchain space in general, okay, and a lot of these conferences where, you know, a lot of deals get made and a lot of people are talking about blockchain and getting together and talking about it, or at meetups and stuff, has almost been, I don't know whether it's intentional or it's just guys being, you know, dumbasses, which, what a shock. It's not like that they're not specifically, or that they're not reaching out to women or something like that. Like, a lot of these events have been downright hostile to women, where either they are being made fun of and videos are getting made about, say, their lack of understanding of the technology and stuff like this, or, you know, a whole bunch of things. In fact, a dear friend of mine, Andreas Antonopoulos, he has a policy that, like, he has a contract. When you ask him to speak at events, he has a non-harassment policy that he wants the conference to put into place, or he won't speak there. And guess what? He gets turned down sometimes. As white hot as Andreas is, you know, to talk, and he's a hell of a talker and has great things to say. I'm both a friend and a fan of the man. And I've seen these non-harassment policies that get set up and everything. I mean, it's to the point he has to do his own conventions, right? Or, you know, his own events. As I understand it, I wouldn't speak for him on that. But anyway, I've seen these things and they're all very basic. Okay, yeah, you know, if someone's being an asshole, blah, 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 you're going to kick them out and all this stuff. And it's all pretty basic fare. And the fact that there are people who won't sign that, it's like, wait, what? I mean, that tells so much of a story in the first place. So now, as far as, you know, should there be targeting to women as far as within message of blockchain marketing? Also, we have the very real problem. I mean, this is kind of a big subject, but there's the very real problem that the blockchain space doesn't seem to even know how to fucking market. They will not spend money on you know, really serious advertising. And that's a problem in and of itself, but, you know, that's a whole other thing. Okay. So they're not even advertising, let alone trying to reach out to women. Do I think that the blockchain space, you know, and blockchain projects and so on, should they try to be more inclusive and reach out to women and all that stuff? Absolutely. Because especially around the world, you know, and these cases have been reported on a few times, especially back when sites like Cointelegraph or I don't know, CoinDesk, whatever these other ones out there, when they used to actually report on stuff and they weren't just, you know, native advertising where they only do a story if a project pays them $5,000 or something to do it. You know, back when they were actually kind of journalistic institutions, they're not anymore. But back when they were, they would report on this stuff where women, especially in other countries, would use Bitcoin, blockchain, you know, whatever cryptocurrency, etc., to be able to make money to get shit done in whatever country that's happening. And it was in countries where women weren't allowed to have bank accounts and stuff like this. So fuck yeah, you should be trying to reach out to those people because they're your passionate user base, which is what's going to keep you sustained going forward when you're in the middle of like crypto winter right now. Okay. You know, Bitcoin is, and not Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin proper, okay, is going strong and going forward because there's real world use case and there are people that are really using it, especially the oppressed in various, other geographic locations around the world. So yeah, you sure as fuck want to, try and reach out to that and be it women or pick your minority and get them involved in it because they're the people that need it most. Now, I'll tell you, as far as patronizing goes, there is a way that you can really do this wrong. And that is, and I've complained about this before, when you go to an event and they have a women in blockchain panel. No. If you want to market this to women, show that anybody can be up on the stage with whatever other, a blockchain luminary or something is having. Make them a keynote speaker, and not because they're a woman. You don't just do it because they're a woman, but I'm just saying make that a possibility, make that a very open thing. But at a lot of these conferences and so on, and even at you go to wherever these, dev houses, wherever these guys are putting all this shit together, and look, they're bringing in, and I have no problem with sex workers, none whatsoever, okay? But I understand where maybe a lot of people, maybe do have issues with that, or the fact is that, okay, they're bringing in sex workers, but they're only bringing in women. They're not bringing in male sex workers for the women to get on with, and so on, right? And so there is this attitude of that this is a boys-only club, and that's a very real problem at conferences, dev houses, if you're just going there, say a gal wants to go and work, at, I don't know, some project based on Ethereum or some kind of horse shit. When they go to the company parties, they're going to be bombarded with, things that do not seem to be inclusive of what they may consider a good time. Okay. And that's a very, very real problem that no one is fucking paying attention to. Is it true outside of the blockchain space as well? You bet your ass it is. But then when we are talking about a technology, and if we're talking about it in the sense, blockchain in and of itself does not necessarily have to be like a freedom idealistic technology of any kind. Okay. But when we're talking about technologies that are about freeing the individual, right? Which I would argue cryptocurrencies certainly can be a big part of. I mean, governments could have their own issued cryptocurrencies too. So you got to be careful with that. But when we're talking about that, and if that's the attitude that we're going with, and that was very much the initial attitude of cryptocurrencies in the blockchain space, I think you need to do better than the rest of Silicon Valley. I think you need to do better than Uber. I think you need to do better than whatever other industry where, oh yeah, but bringing in, sexy dancers and everything is order of the day. Okay. So what if that's what everyone, this goes back to the classic adage of, what? Well, if everybody's walking off a cliff, are you going to? Fucking be better. If you're promising, and at the very least, if they're not promising freedom, the blockchain space is certainly doing this, promising the future of everything, then be, as we say on Sovereign Tech, be the fucking future. And start treating everybody with the same level of respect and consideration. Everybody gets all hot and bothered when you use the term respect. Fine, then consideration is a part of respect, but then let's be particular. With the same consideration, oh yes, we want women to hear, so we're going to bring in male dancers or something like that. Fine, at least do that. Hey, believe me, I'm all about hedonism. I am all about having a good time. And like I said, I have all the respect in the world for sex workers. Okay. And whatever else. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. Great. But then let's have some consideration for who else is around. Bring in, bring in drag queens, bring in trans dancers, bring in whatever. Be inclusive. Oh, but that costs a little bit more. Well, in the long run, if you help out the oppressed, and yes, I think on a worldwide scale, women are still, just totally oppressed, then appeal to them, and make them feel welcome. And yes, absolutely reach out to them. Okay. So many things have come out of, you could say, a lot of people talk about that. A lot of technologies really get forwarded by porn. They get forwarded by sex work and so on. This is true. I mean, it's not entirely true, but there's a lot of truth to that. And I would argue, though, that a lot of times when that technology gets to the point where it's democratized and the individual can use it more, oftentimes it's women that are the spearheads of allowing for that to happen. And I mean, look, we wouldn't have YouTube today if there weren't enterprising women, and I'm serious, enterprising women in the late 90s and so on, who used the abilities of streaming video, helped streamline and create the importance and necessity for streaming video and so on. Through camgirl work or whatever else, to where, streaming video on the internet needed to be a thing. Okay? Was that, now you could argue that was very much appealing to men, and I get that argument, but at the same time also, the democratization of the usage of the technology was helping women. Okay, and so if you can appeal directly in that marketing to women, I mean, fucking go for it. Again, this is not knocking, because if you're thinking that I'm complaining about sex workers being hired for Bitcoin conferences, no, I'm not necessarily complaining about that. I'm saying, though, you are creating an environment that is not considering, perhaps everybody that you want involved, and you want the oppressed, no matter, women, whoever, women, whatever minority and so on, you absolutely want them involved because they're the people that are going to use your technology. They're going to be your most passionate users. They're going to be your most, I mean, even if you want to think from an asshole marketing perspective, they're going to be your greatest advertisers. I mean, they're going to be walking around like Mormons, with the Bible saying, have you heard the gospel of Bitcoin? They're going to be your best ones. But again, most importantly, they're the people that really need it. I don't expect every blockchain project to be given a shit about human freedom, but the ones that do, you bet your ass. Appeal to women, appeal to minorities. All right. I mean, yeah, that can't be said enough. Too many blockchain projects, alone, just concentrate on the fucking, all right, how do I integrate with the, American financial system? What a shame. When you have a technology that, and this is a point like that Andreas brings up often, that you could reach out to the other 6 billion people on planet Earth. How about appealing to them? Yeah, well, a lot of them are women, and, and appealing to all that and their unique situations, I think is a very good thing. Okay? So I hope that kind of answers it. But again, you can do it wrong. If you go too far and say, oh, we'll give the women in blockchain a very special panel. I mean, really all you're creating is a moment on stage where you're going to have a bunch of, jerk offs in the, probably literally jerking off, a bunch of guys, probably sitting out in there and just salivating over, oh, there's women here. That's what you're going to get. So don't do it that way. Okay, do it in a way that is considerate and inclusive. Absolutely. So anyway, if someone wants to argue with that, don't delete your Patreon account. Don't just talk to me. Give me your case. You tell me, and I'll respond. So, okay, I wanted to get into another thing. Fucking A, and we're running really, really long here. All right, what the hell? We'll do it. So this was sent to me actually by Jim Jesus. He messaged me on Patreon. He says, hey, I don't know if you remember a Dr. Bones who falsely accused Kevin Slaughter and Wolfie Lawnstriker of being Nazis. The guy wearing a hammer and sickle mask and calling himself an egoist. But apparently he's being accused of rape. Okay, so, maybe this is fitting to talk about this going after the fact. So we talked about this a long while back on Patreon, where there were accusations and it seemed pretty damning, but now, the idea that it was actually a lot of it was false and it was pretty much this guy, Dr. Bones. All right. Egoism. If you don't know what egoism is, to call it a brand of anarchy is a misnomer, but to best, maybe simply understand it it's a brand, egoist anarchism. It's a brand of anarchism that is kind of an anarchism with no rules. It's not communist. It's not capitalist. It's completely individualistic. Benjamin Tucker, who, a lot of libertarians look up to, not Jeffrey Tucker, Benjamin Tucker, was very much an egoist. A lot of the early anarchists that, even in America, that people appeal to were either openly egoist or had the words without maybe using the term. All right. I am an egoist all the way. That is absolutely my brand of anarchism if I have to come up with one. Even though, again, there's arguments around, well, egoism actually isn't anarchism. Egoism is its own thing. Anarchism is a part of egoism, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it just gets into these wild philosophical conversations that get lost in terms and then nothing gets done. So anyway, within egoism, there are superstars. Celebritarians is what you would call them. As far as with like anarcho-capitalists and so on. You have your comparative figures to say your Tom Woods or your Jeffrey Tuckers or your go down your Bob Murphys and so on. Go down the list, or your Angela Keatons. Go down the list. And even though Angela Keaton's not like, I don't think she would call herself an anarcho-capitalist anymore, if ever. Now, Kevin Slaughter and Wolfie Landstreicher and Dr. Bones in the past couple of years, as far as Dr. Bones goes. But, I mean, these are kind of your versions of celebritarians within egoism in a very real way. And Wolfie Landstreicher, of course, did the very good translation, even though I disagree with some of his interpretation, but his translation of a lot of Max Stirner's who's kind of the father of egoism, or considered the quote-unquote father of egoism. Like there's The Unique in Its Property, which is his version of the ego in its own, that Wolfie Landstreicher translated from Max Stirner. He did a great translation of Stirner's Critics, and so on. Wolfie Landstreicher, so this situation happened where Dr. Bones was claiming that Kevin Slaughter was a Nazi and anybody that was working with him is a Nazi. And so Wolfie Landstreicher kind of believed the evidence as I understand it. And then he more or less like released his digital versions of the Unique in Its Property. That way, Kevin Slaughter's book publishing company, which is Underworld Amusements, would effectively not make money off of the matter. And so Wolfie's like, well, fuck it, I'm washing my hands of Kevin Slaughter because this guy's a Nazi or something like that. Now, apparently, a lot of that might have been made up or something, blah, 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 blah. And this Dr. Bones guy was clearly doing a very classic tactic where if you're trying to make a name for yourself within a certain social group, or subculture, you attack the big names. And that gives you some kind of credibility. And maybe if it gets big enough, if the stink is made big enough, you end up becoming a big name in egoism in your subculture. And this would definitely happen with Dr. Bones, where he would end up becoming kind of this big deal. Now, Dr. Bones has, as mentioned, he wears like this red bandana with the, hammer and sickle on it. Had a very communist bent. And so, and I talked about this situation back when it originally happened. And I said, well, I don't really agree with this guy on, certainly on the communism aspects of any of this. And in fact, at Underworld Amusements, Kevin Slaughter's, bookstore, which, look, they put out some really great shit. You can buy some of it on Amazon. Obviously, to some degree, Underworld Amusements and Kevin Slaughter's still going to get the money. But you can, he's doing very important work. He's putting out content and classics of anarchism that you just can't get anywhere else. I have bought many books and released them for free, actually, on the Patreon page for Sovereign Tech. Many Egoist classics from Underworld Amusements. I have to appreciate that those things are out there and that they exist. Now, if all the bullshit claims against Kevin Slaughter are out there, great. Anyway, the point I was going to bring up is that Kevin Slaughter has published work by egoist authors who are ardently anti-communist. And probably, I don't know if this is in relation to Dr. Bones or what, but anyway, he's done that. So, Dr. Bones wants to claim, and a lot of other people, there are a lot of other egoists who want to claim that egoism is inherently communist. I would disagree with that statement. It has no, egoism has no economic model. It can be applied to other economic models, but in and of itself, it has no real economic model as far as like, okay, this is how distribution works and blah, 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 be like the differences between communism and capitalism. So anyway, it seems like Kevin Slaughter, I mean, I didn't have concerns around Wolfie Lawnstriker as far as him being a Nazi. I didn't believe that for a second. But as far as like Kevin Slaughter, okay, if he's not a Nazi, fantastic. Because like I said, Underworld Amusements is just putting out some of the best books in the world right now. And if you can feel better about that, dynamite. All right. So we got that out there now, but to talk about what's going on with Dr. Bones. This is a guy who, again, I'm pretty sure I said when I reviewed that whole situation that I just described before on a Patreon episode, I said, I don't know that I like this guy. I don't agree with his politics. I mean, great, he's an egoist or claims to be an egoist and so on, but wow. So now he is being, and I'll put the link in the show notes. It's a pretty damning case by this gal who I think is actually trans, but by this gal who she has, whatever, Facebook messages or something like that. And I read through a lot of it, and it's, more or less proving this guy is just, a sociopath. That being Dr. Bones, this guy's a sociopath. Like his wife left him over this. He was cheating on his wife, which, whatever, there's a lot of conversation to have around, that, even that within egoism. But it's an ugly situation, and it does very much appear that this guy, raped this person, and was even trying to like have like group sex that this person was not interested in. A whole bunch of stuff. It's really ugly reading. If you want to read it, you can read it. So I guess my main takeaway, there's two things I want to talk about here. First off, okay, let's let Kevin Slaughter a little bit off the hook, and go ahead and frequent Underworld Amusements if you want, and get some amazing, really genuinely amazing books from there. So we got that part, okay? And Wolfie, there was never, in my opinion, there was never a concern around Wolfie Lawnstriker anyway, and he's, he does great work of translating really classic egoist texts that are very important, especially by Max Stirner himself. But there's another point I want to get into about this, okay? I don't know what the fuck it is, and maybe this is true about anarchism overall, but certainly within egoism. Okay, I've spent a lot of time on more traditional egoist forums. I've not spent time in like the Facebook groups and all that. That's just, I don't spend time on Facebook. And certainly there's like an egoist contingent on Twitter. I don't understand why egoism just attracts like the... All right, look, I'm a weird guy. I am a freak, okay? Like I really am. I guess maybe if you saw me in the grocery store, you wouldn't know that. But because I guess I look normal, I don't know. I could have a whole conversation around that too. But, and actually I don't look normal. I have, anyway. I don't know why the fuck that egoism like attracts these I hate to say it, but whatever, these whack jobs. Like, I don't understand. Like, I mean, it's cool to be a freak. It's cool to dress wild and to be all punk and everything. Like, it really is. But I don't understand. Like, why just the weirdest goddamn people, who you'd never let your computer sit next to for more than a second. Why they get attracted to egoism. I mean, I guess it's because of really that message of no rules, but like, I think that there's, one can wholeheartedly accept the message of, no rules and the individual is the measure of all things, and, still be like an empathetic and, straight to head person. Like, I don't get it. Okay. Now, I grant you, and this is true in libertarianism as well, because like the message in libertarianism and anarcho-capitalism of don't call the cops is totally welcoming to sociopaths. And that's a very real problem that libertarianism and anarcho-capitalism has done. I can't see much of anything that it's done about that. Egoism does very much the same thing, because there is this message of, you can do whatever you need to do whatever you want to do. It's all about you, then come on in and be the biggest asshole the world's ever seen. So I get it that the message can be attractive to that kind of person, that it can be attractive to a type like Dr. Bones, a rapist. Okay, I can really grasp why that happens. And I'm seriously not judging, like really I'm not judging how people look at it. I mean, people can do whatever they want. But I just don't get like egoism, the larger egoism community, even though that's almost an oxymoron, an ironic statement. I don't understand why I don't even, because I hate saying it because I'm all about weird people. I'm all about freaks. I think it's great. But like why it attracts such like oddballs and such, fuck. Or I guess what I'm trying to say is that I understand what egoism says. Okay. About how the individual is the only one that matters. I don't understand why more egoists don't get the completeness of what Max Stirner was saying. Even though Max Stirner didn't know the term empathy, he talked about empathy, that you feel your brother's pain. Okay, when you're actually in touch with yourself, when you have self-love, you feel the pain of, the person next to you and the person that you care about. That's empathy. All right, you're able to understand that, be in their shoes and so on. Which empathy inherently means you don't treat the other person like an asshole. And while it is absolutely true that you, the individual, are the only thing that matters, and the individual is the measure of all things, that is true for everyone else as well. Do you understand? It's a paradoxical statement, but there are paradoxes that are absolute truths. Okay, and the paradox that you are the most important thing in the universe, but then so is the person next to you. Like, how do you miss that? Where does egoism does not, you could say that it gives you permission to be an asshole, but then at the same time, it doesn't, because it's saying that if you've accepted egoism, or not accept, it's not like Jesus in your heart, but if you've understood egoism, you will understand that the unique one is important, and that, you look upon all property as your property and so on. But then you have the understanding that the other person does that too. And that what you realize is that you get, in fact, this is like what I've mentioned this before, where Kurzgesagt talks about an altruistic egoism, and that is that other people doing well in life ultimately adds up to you doing better in life. Okay, you're doing everything for selfish, or not selfish. Selfish means you're going to harm others in thinking of yourself. In self-interested, with a self-interested lens, you do all things. But you recognize that other people doing well, that other people's happiness can lend to your own. And Stirner totally talks about that all the time. So why the fuck egoism gets full of like assholes, and I don't want to use the term weirdos. I don't know what term to use. Okay. Because weirdos are fine. Freaks are great. Okay. But why it attracts such, and I don't want to judge like damaged people or something like that. I don't know. I got to come up with a new term. How about this? Not a new term. Why it attracts such unstable fucking people. I don't get it. I don't get it. Like I can't get along with most, and that's why I don't engage with them much. It's not like, I can quote to you Stirner. It's not like this is my own interpretation or something. I know exactly what Stirner fucking says. Okay. And I'm not saying everybody has to be like me or some kind of bullshit. Okay. Or that there's even like a doctrine within egoism. That also would be an ironic or even oxymoronic statement. Okay. I just don't get it. I don't understand why there aren't more stable, mature individuals, okay, that get to egoism and grasp it and work towards the egoist epoch that Max Stirner talked about. And I guess fuck, maybe. And they are out there, because I would almost argue, in fact, when we talked about this was that episode 307, the episode The End, where we talked about Douglas Rushkoff, how he was saying that investors, tech execs and investors were saying, hey, where do I run to when all the shit hits the fan? like in a way that's almost like, shall we say, a vulgar egoism, a vulgar egoistic attitude of that, okay, I don't care what happens to everybody else, I just have to get away. And, you know, in fact, when you read what's also a classic egoist work, The Occult Technology of Power, that's pretty much what that book, even though that book is kind of fiction, the claim it's trying to make is that the people in power, you know, maybe the bankers, or in this case, the tech execs, or even politicians and so on, they know that egoism is, shall we say, right and true. Okay. They know that. And that's why they're okay with, you know, being tyrants over everyone else, because they see themselves as the most important, blah, blah, blah. All right. So now those people, though, would be seen as respectable, right? Like a lot of tech execs would be seen as respectable. In fact, like even Elon Musk has set up his companies as a union of egoists. I've written about that. I did a whole blog post about it, even though fuck Elon Musk. But, you know, like they get it. You know, and these people could be seen as like respectable or stable individuals and so on. I mean, I would argue if you're trying to have power over somebody else, you're not really that stable of a person. Or should I say power over them without consent? You know, you're not really stable at all. But yeah, I get it why it attracts these people, because of just because in a certain interpretation, this is attractive to sociopaths. But like, why there aren't more people that are stable, shall we say, that don't seem to jump on board with egoism? I don't know. And it bothers the fuck out of me. It really does. I mean, I'm rambling now, but I don't get it. It's almost to the point where I feel like, okay, you know, and believe me, I've read most, and I continue to purchase most egoist books that ever get out there, and that's a very niche thing, and it's very easy to do. Like, you can ease an individual inside of a year, much less actually, probably inside of 6 months, could very easily read, you know, all of the egoist texts that are available right now. And also, it's not an expensive proposition either. Okay, there's a part of me that almost wants to write a book on it, just to like some have like maybe I would title it Egoist Sanity or something. God damn, some of these people are just fucking nuts. I don't get it. So that's what I got. It's totally believable that Dr. Bones did what he did. And well, anyway, I brought all that up. I don't really know where else to go with that. Just watch out for, I don't know. Something has to be done about this. Okay. Like, there needs to be some kind of real voice of sanity who also can't be pointed at consorting with Nazis or something like that. That is espousing egoism, because it's important, because I don't think we're ever going to really get anywhere as a species without egoism. All right. You know, without egoist anarchism and all that. I don't. I agree with what Stirner said. And yeah, that's what I got. So, okay. And this episode's running long again. Let's get into real quick. I'm just going to mention the album of the week. And this is a fine album that came out last year in 2018, earlier in the year. It's by a band called Shinedown, which I've enjoyed for a few years. You know, I can get it where people might make fun of that, but whatever. They, of course, you know, they did Sound of Madness and, you know, a lot of other Second Chance, right? A ton of, you know, they've had some hits. But their album, Attention, it's a bit of a mixed bag. And there's certainly some songs, like, what is it? The song, Get Up is kind of a weird, like, dance number, like quasi inspirational dance number. It's a very weird song. There's some, like, there's a lot of different musical styles here. It's not just, you know, straight to head metal, like Shinedown generally will do. There's some weird songs on this, but some of the rockers on it, some of the heavier songs, like particularly the song Devil. I actually opened an episode of Sovereign Tech months ago with the song Devil because I thought it was so great. A lot of those, or Black Soul, I mean, are just some of the best work Shinedown's ever done. And Devil, I think, is one of the most badass songs I've ever heard. I mean, I love it. So, you know, there's a few songs on here that are totally worth the price of admission, but then I'll admit there's some weird ass songs in here that might be your flavor. It's just not what I was expecting with Shinedown. And maybe I got to give it a few more listens to really appreciate those songs, but they're a little weird. I don't know. I mean, I get it that a lot of these bands became a big deal in the aughts. In fact, it really speaks to something I've said before. So, you know, a lot of your metal bands and hard rock acts and everything from the 70s and 80s, you know, they're still around. Maybe they're starting to retire finally, maybe, but, you know, they're still around making some of the best music ever made and some of the best music they've ever made, which sometimes is a, you know, pretty bold statement, but it's true. And they're still around because, you know, they're really talented musicians, and they have an interesting basis, perhaps, for their musicianship in a lot of other types of music, say the blues or something like that. Now, I've said this before, that like take a band like Judas Priest, okay, that's been going for 50 years. Picture Korn, the band Korn, John Davis, right? Picture Korn 30 years from now. Do you really think that they're still going to be like headlining arenas like Judas Priest can? Do you think that they're still going to be putting out like really great music and all this stuff? I think it's kind of strange. I mean, bands, even, you know, classic metal acts certainly have had their day where they are experimenting with other sounds, but they usually don't veer too much from metal. It might be just a slightly different style. It's ironic that bands like Korn, and even like with this album, you'll hear it with Shinedown, or even like Papa Roach has dramatically changed their sound from time to time. You know, how I think they know that they don't have, or even like Godsmack. Godsmack had an awesome new album come out this year, but they didn't write half the songs. They brought in other people to write, and I know other metal acts have done that too. It's not uncommon. It's just the point that I think my point that I've made really for 10 years is that a lot of this more grungy, or whatever you want to call the metal that came out in the aughts and everything, bands like Stain and so on, it's not sustainable. You can't keep up that either that attitude, or there's just not enough opportunity for creativity within that, and these bands are going to other styles because they know they can't keep it up. You know, or like Avenged Sevenfold. What was it? Hail to the King, that album? That's a classic metal album. They totally went away from their, you know, their standard sound and so on. And I'm not saying that that's bad to do that. I'm just saying it kind of proves my point that, you know, when there are objective metrics to art, you know, sustainability, how long can you stick around? How long is it still, does it still have meaning? You know, how long does it still have, you know, what's like staying power with art and so on? You know, there's something to be said for that, like the Mona Lisa, you know, or something like that. The mystery that still exists, that everyone still looks at it for, blah, blah, blah. These things, you know, there are objective metrics to art. And so when I say, you know, when I was like in the late 90s and early aughts, and I like some of these bands quite a bit. Don't confuse me. I really do. I like Shinedown. I like Papa Roach. I like, you know, a lot of these other ones. You know, and I'd say, oh, no, but they're, you know, Motley Crue's better than them, or Judas Priest is better than them, or this band's better than them. Well, they are. I mean, they're still, I mean, here's an objective metric for you. Who's selling out fucking arenas and who's not? Precisely. Okay. You know, who's still making albums that have, you know, that stick to their guns as far as sound? Those other bands. You know, it's not your bands, it's not your Stains, it's not your Korns, right? I mean, hell, they did a whole album with Skrillex, right? Or whatever. It's like a dubstep album. Anyway, just kind of proves my point. Whatever. Golden Stallion is right once again. But I like all the stuff. You know, I'm a person, I say this many times, I'm a person that loves music in the abstract. Okay? There's so many people who say, oh yeah, I love music. No, they love their kind of music. You shouldn't say you love music. You love this. You love what you're into. I love all kinds of music, and I can appreciate some of what Shinedown did on Attention, even the weirder stuff. But boy, you know, when they're in their element with their you know, heavy guitars, man, can they kick some ass. And they do with especially the song Devil, I think you'll love. So anyway, check that out. Shinedown, Attention, Attention. I'm not going to say it's like the greatest album ever, but it's a good album. It's an effort that has a couple songs on there that are just really, really kick ass. So anyway, that's it for your Wednesday Q&A for, well, this is the first one of 2019. How about that? Woo! Can't believe that it's 2019, but it is already. And well, things are taking place. So I will see all of you on the other side.